Have you ever looked back at a moment in your life and realized that what felt like the worst thing that could happen was actually God shutting a door you weren't supposed to walk through? I'm talking about those times when you begged for something, prayed for it, worked for it, lost sleep over it only to have it fall apart right in front of you. And months later, sometimes years later, you discover that what you thought was rejection was actually divine protection. 11 years of my life invested. A career I built from nothing. A partnership I trusted with everything I had. A business that consumed 60-hour weeks, sacrificed weekends, and every ounce of faith I could muster. All of it built on what I thought was solid ground. But this story isn't about success. It is about the 6 ways God protected me when I was too blind to see the storm forming right in front of my face. I met Daniel at a business conference in 2012. The kind of event where everyone is trying to network, hand out cards, make connections that might lead somewhere. He had this energy, confident, visionary, the type who could sell ice to someone living in winter. We grabbed coffee after one of the sessions, talked about our industries, shared frustrations about working for other people when we had dreams of our own. 6 months later, we signed partnership papers. 50-50 split. Equal investment, equal responsibility, equal vision. Or so I thought. The first 3 years were incredible. We went from a rented office space above a laundromat to a legitimate commercial location. From 2 employees to 15. Revenue that went from barely covering rent to genuine profit margins. Late nights that felt purposeful, not exhausting. The kind of grind that you don't mind because you can see the future taking shape. I remember this specific moment, August 2015, standing in our new office space, brand new furniture. Our logo on the wall, windows overlooking the city we'd grown up in. Daniel raised his coffee mug, smiled, and said, "We did it, brother. This is just the beginning." I believed him completely. What a cosmic joke. Because while celebrating our beginning, God was already preparing to show me the 6 ways He protects His children. Even when they are too stubborn to notice the warnings. Even when they've convinced themselves that loyalty means ignoring the signs. Even when trusting someone feels more comfortable than questioning what doesn't add up. The first crack appeared so subtly I almost missed it entirely. Daniel started having personal matters that required time away. Nothing dramatic at first. A sick relative, some legal issue with a property he owned, stress about a relationship that was falling apart. Each excuse sounded legitimate. Each absence felt temporary. But temporary became frequent. 2 days a week turned into 3. 3 became 4. And suddenly, I was the one meeting with clients, handling supplier negotiations, managing the staff, while he dealt with whatever personal crisis had emerged that week. Want to know what's worse? I covered for him, told clients he was handling back-end operations, told employees he was securing new contracts, told myself he'd get through whatever he was dealing with and things would balance out. The second sign was financial. We'd always maintained transparencies, shared access to accounts, joint decisions on major expenses, weekly reviews of cash flow. But around month 4 of his increasing absences, he started making unilateral decisions. A new software system we didn't need. A marketing campaign I hadn't approved. Equipment upgrades that felt premature. When I questioned him, his response was always the same. "Trust me, I'm handling it. You focus on operations. Let me handle growth strategy." Unlike an idiot, I did, because that's what partners do, right? They trust each other. They divide responsibilities. They don't micromanage or question every decision when things are still profitable overall. Except our profit margins were shrinking. Not catastrophically, just gradually enough that I convinced myself it was normal business fluctuation, economy adjusting, seasonal variations. temporary dips that would correct themselves. The third sign involved a name that came up constantly. Marcus, Daniel's new business consultant. Someone he'd met through another networking event, someone with connections and industry insights that could take us to the next level. Marcus apparently had experience with companies 10 times our size. Marcus, new investors. Marcus understood Marcus we hadn't tapped into yet. I never met Marcus, not once. Every time I suggested we have a meeting, all three of us discuss these strategies together, Daniel had a reason why it wasn't the right time. Marcus was traveling. Marcus was closing another deal. Marcus preferred to work through Daniel directly since they'd already established a working rhythm. Should have been a massive red flag. Should have made me demand a face-to-face meeting. Shugvi made me question why the supposed consultant had so much influence over our business direction but zero interest in meeting the other 50% owner. Instead, I told myself I was being paranoid, that I should be grateful Daniel was being proactive about growth, that questioning his judgment would make me look insecure or controlling. The storm was building, clouds darkening across the sky I refused to look up at. By month 8, our longest-standing clients started expressing concerns. Delayed deliveries, quality issues, communication breakdowns, things that had never been problems before suddenly appearing with increasing frequency. I worked longer hours trying to patch the leaks, personally followed up with every complaint, rebuilt relationships that felt strangely fragile, absorbed the stress, while Daniel remained focused on his strategic initiatives. With the mysterious Marcus, our staff started asking questions I couldn't answer. Why were certain supplies being ordered through different vendors at higher prices? Why had our usual payment schedules changed? Why were some invoices being sent to an address I didn't recognize? I brought these concerns to Daniel during one of our increasingly rare face-to-face meetings. His response was immediate and defensive. I was being controlling. I was micromanaging. I was threatened by his initiative because I was comfortable staying small while he had vision for expansion. That argument hurt more than it should have, made me question myself, made me wonder if I really was the problem, too cautious, too conservative, too focused on what we had instead of what we could become. If this story is resonating with you, if you've ever trusted someone whose actions didn't quite match their words, subscribe to the channel. Sometimes we need to hear these experiences to recognize patterns in our own lives. And I'll keep sharing if you keep listening. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that God was already working, already protecting, already preparing to reveal the truth in a way that would devastate me temporarily but save me permanently. The clouds weren't just building, the storm was about to break. I never wanted to be the kind of person who goes through someone's files. For 9 years, I'd respected boundaries, trusted completely. Never once checked Daniel's computer, questioned his explanations, or demanded proof of anything he claimed. But when our accountant called me personally, not Daniel, me saying there were discrepancies in our quarterly report that she couldn't reconcile, something cold settled in my chest. She needed access to some files Daniel supposedly had, files about the Marcus consulting fees, files about the new vendor contracts, files that apparently only Daniel had copies of, and he'd been too busy to send them to her for 3 weeks. I had legitimate business reasons to access our shared server. I had authorization. I had every right to retrieve files necessary for legal compliance. What I found broke something fundamental inside me. The folder was labeled Strategic Growth Initiative. Professional, official, exactly what you'd expect from legitimate business expansion plans. Inside were bank statements for an account I didn't know existed. My hand started shaking before I even opened the first document. Some part of me already knew, already understood. Already recognized that the foundation I'd built my entire adult life on was about to crumble. The account had been opened 14 months ago, right around the time Marcus entered the picture, right around the time Daniel started having all those personal emergencies requiring time away, transfers out of our business account that I'd never approved. 50,000 here, 37,000 there, amounts small enough to hide in legitimate business expenses if you scattered them across months. Amounts that became staggering when you added them up. Total $218,000. But that wasn't what destroyed me. Not the money. Not even the betrayal. It was the email thread I found next. Daniel to Marcus. The beauty of this setup is he's so focused on operations, he doesn't even look at the financial details anymore. I could probably pull another 100K before he notices anything. Marcus to Daniel. Your partner sounds like the perfect Mark Truce. Too much. Questions too little. How much longer do you think you can string him along? Daniel to Marcus. As long as it takes. He's so desperate to believe in this partnership, he'll accept whatever explanation I give him. It's almost sad how loyal he is. I read that exchange 17 times, memorized every word, felt each sentence like a physical wound opening in real time. My partner of 9 years, the person I'd trusted with everything, the person I'd defended 2 clients, covered 4 with staff, made excuses for when his behavior didn't make sense. He'd been systematically robbing our company, robbing me, and laughing about how easy I made it. The Marcus account had deposits matching our missing funds. Not a consultant, not a business advisor, a fake identity. A name on bank accounts Daniel controlled. There was no Marcus. There never had been. Just Daniel creating an elaborate fiction to justify stealing from a business we'd built together. From a partnership I'd honored. From a trust I'd never questioned. I didn't cry, didn't rage, didn't break down. Instead, I took screenshots of everything, methodically, carefully, every bank statement, every email, every transfer record, sent them to my personal account, downloaded copies to a flash drive, created a paper trail that couldn't be deleted or denied. The emotional part of me wanted to confront him immediately, drive to wherever he was, throw the evidence in his face, demand answers I already knew. But something else had taken over. Something colder, more calculated. The part of me that understood this wasn't just about betrayal, this was theft, fraud, something that required legal precision, not emotional reaction. I called our attorney first. Explained everything with a calm that felt like dissociation. He was silent for 30 seconds after I finished. Then, how soon can you get me copies of everything you found? Within 2 hours, we had an emergency meeting. My attorney, his associates, and me in a conference room that smelled like old coffee and expensive leather. The associate looked at the evidence, looked at me, and said something I'll never forget. Mr. Thompson, you have an airtight case. This isn't a civil dispute, this is criminal fraud. That night, Daniel called me. Casual, friendly, wanted to schedule our monthly partnership review for next week. I remember standing in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, listening to him talk about quarterly projections and upcoming opportunities, listening to the voice of someone who thought I was still in the dark, still trusting, still the perfect Mark he described in his emails. Sounds good, Daniel, I said, voice steady, emotionless. Let's meet next Tuesday. I'll have some things to discuss. After I hung up, I looked at my reflection in the kitchen window. The man staring back looked tired, older than his years, but his eyes were different. No more faith in people who didn't deserve it. No more assuming goodness without verification. No more loyalty that ignored evidence. God was shutting the door I didn't want closed, and I was about to discover why. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. Daniel walked into our office Tuesday morning with his laptop, his usual coffee, his comfortable smile of someone who believed he was still in control. I had 3 other people in the room waiting: my attorney, a forensic accountant, and a detective from the fraud division. I'll never forget the exact moment his face changed, the second he realized what was happening. The way color drained from his skin when my attorney slid a folder across the table containing printed copies of every transaction, every email, every piece of evidence I'd gathered. He tried denial first, claimed the accounts were legitimate business expenses, insisted Marcus was real, just someone who preferred to remain anonymous, argued that I was misinterpreting internal communications taken out of context. The detective let him talk for about 90 seconds, then interrupted with a single sentence. "Mr. Harrison, you have the right to remain silent." Everything unraveled after that, quickly, brutally, completely. The legal outcome: full restitution ordered. Daniel had to liquidate personal assets to begin repayment: his car, his investment properties, everything except his primary residence. The amount he'd stolen plus penalties plus legal fees meant he'd be paying for years. I retained full ownership of the business, every contract, every client relationship, every asset we'd built together. The judge's ruling was clear: fraudulent partners forfeit their stake. Daniel lost his professional license in our industry, not temporarily, permanently. The kind of black mark that follows someone forever in databases that employers check. The financial reality: he went from co-owning a thriving business to work in retail. I verified this 6 months later when a mutual acquaintance mentioned seeing him managing a sporting goods store across town. The same person who de-lectured me about thinking too small was now explaining return policies to teenagers, buying basketball shoes. The irony wasn't lost on me. Neither was the justice. The social fallout: our industry is small. Word spreads. Within weeks, everyone in our network knew what happened. Clients we'd worked with for years reached out personally to express support. Competitors called to say they'd always sensed something off about Daniel. Professional associations quietly removed his name from their directories. He tried reinventing himself in another state. I heard about it through the same grapevine that had exposed him. Lasted 4 months before someone recognized his name, did a basic background check, and his new opportunity disappeared. But here's what surprised me most. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not vindication. Not the sweet taste of revenge I'd imagined during those first dark weeks after discovery. Just a cold, empty space where friendship used to exist, where trust used to live, where a partnership I'd believed in had rotted from the inside, while I kept watering it like it was still alive. The detective told me later that Daniel had been planning an exit strategy. Another 6 months of transfers, then a sudden dissolution of the partnership citing irreconcilable differences. He would have walked away with nearly $500,000 stolen from a business I'd built, while making it look like a normal business breakup. God shut that door 30 days before Daniel planned to execute his final theft. 30 days. If our accountant hadn't called when she did, if I hadn't checked those files that specific week, if I'd continued trusting just a little bit longer, I would have lost everything. But I didn't. Because protection doesn't always look like what we expect. Sometimes it looks like devastation that saves you from something worse. Sometimes it looks like betrayal that reveals truth before the real damage happens. The business recovered within 8 months. Clients appreciated the transparency. Staff respected the decisiveness. Revenue actually increased once I stopped covering for a partner who'd been a liability disguised as an asset. Daniel's story ended in consequences he'd engineered himself. Mine ended in a lesson I never wanted to learn but desperately needed to understand. That was the first way God protected me. But there were 5 more I hadn't recognized yet. Life now looks different. Quieter, more careful. I run the business alone, smaller team, tighter operations, no partners. I work with a trusted CFO who reports to an outside accounting firm that audits monthly. Trust, but verify. Always verify. Some days are harder than others. I still catch myself occasionally drafting an email to someone who doesn't deserve my communication. Still hear voices in conversations that remind me of promises that meant nothing. But I learned something that changed everything. God's protection often arrives disguised as pain. When that door slammed shut, when Daniel's betrayal exploded, my comfortable reality, I couldn't see the gift. Couldn't understand why God would allow someone I trusted to devastate me so completely. Now I see clearly. God wasn't causing the pain. He was preventing something far worse. He was shutting a door I kept trying to hold open because I was too loyal to recognize. I was partnering with someone who saw me as an opportunity, not a person. The 6 ways became unmistakable. In hindsight, 1. He gave me warning signs I ignored but documented them anyway through that accountant's call. 2. He placed people in my path who questioned what I accepted, clients who mentioned concerns I dismissed. 3. He preserved evidence. I could have missed files. Danielle got careless about hiding. 4. He provided legal protection through time and discovery happened before the final theft. 5. He surrounded me with genuine support, an attorney who worked weekends, clients who stayed loyal, staff who had my back. 6. He revealed character before I invested another decade, 30 days before the planned exit that would be destroyed me. Every single protection was invisible in the moment. Every single one looked like something else. Annoyance, a complication, a crisis, a betrayal. But each one was God closing a door I was desperate to keep open. Here is what I want you to understand. When someone shows you who they are through their actions, believe them the first time, not the 3rd time. Not after you've convinced yourself their words matter more than their behavior. Not after you've invested so much you can't imagine starting over. The first time, because loyalty without discernment isn't love. It's self-destruction with a noble name. And sometimes the most loving thing God does is remove people from our lives who were never meant to stay. If you're in a situation where nothing quite adds up, where you're remaking excuses for behavior that doesn't align with words, where you're covering for someone who should be carrying their own weight, where trust feels like something you're giving but never receiving, pay attention. God might be trying to protect you. And protection doesn't always feel comfortable. Sometimes it feels like a loss, like failure, like the floor disappearing beneath your feet. But when the storm clears and you can finally see what you were being protected from, you'll understand why that door had to close, why that person had to leave, why God loved you enough to let you hurt temporarily instead of letting you be destroyed permanently. If this story resonated with you, if you've experienced God's protection in ways that only made sense later, leave a comment sharing your experience. Subscribe if you want more honest conversations about faith, betrayal, and the hard lessons that shape us. Because these stories matter, and sometimes we need to hear that we're not alone in the devastation that eventually becomes deliverance.